The painting had hung in my living room for 18 months. A small impressionist landscape that caught the morning light perfectly through my apartment's east-facing window. To most people it looked like a pleasant but unremarkable piece. Soft brushstrokes depicting a garden path lined with water lilies, the kind of thing you might find at an upscale hotel or a doctor's office. To me it represented something much more significant. My first major acquisition as a professional art dealer. Dad had been eyeing it skeptically for months during his monthly check-in visits, which had become increasingly frequent since I'd quit my job at the marketing firm 2 years ago to start my own gallery business. "Madison, honey," he'd said during his last visit, gesturing at the painting with his coffee mug, "I don't understand your taste in art. This looks like something a college student would hang in their dorm room." I just smiled and changed the subject, the way I'd learned to do whenever Dad shared his opinions about my life choices. There was no point in explaining that the college dorm painting was actually an early Claude Monet, part of his lesser-known garden series, or that I'd acquired it through a private estate sale for significantly less than its auction value. Dad preferred his art obvious and expensive-looking, large abstracts with bold colors and thick frames, the kind that announced their importance from across a room. Subtlety wasn't his strong suit, whether in art or in life. "I think it's pretty," I'd said simply, which had earned me another lecture about investing in quality pieces that hold their value. Now, on a rainy Thursday afternoon in March, Dad stood in my living room again, but this time he wasn't just criticizing my decor. He was removing it. "Madison, you won't even miss this thing," he announced, carefully lifting the small canvas from its hook on the wall. "It's been sitting here gathering dust while I've been looking for something to brighten up the office." "It hasn't been gathering dust, Dad. I look at it every morning." "That's exactly the problem," he continued, wrapping the painting in the blanket he'd brought from his car. "You're wasting your time staring at mediocre art when you should be focused on building a real career." My brother Kevin laughed from his position on my couch, where he'd been scrolling through his phone while Dad conducted this latest intervention. "Come on, Madison. Dad's doing you a favor. That thing screams, 'I shop at Target Home Goods.'" Mom, who had been quietly examining my bookshelf, turned around with her diplomatic smile. "Sweetheart, your father's office could really use some personality. And it's not like you paid much for it, right?" "Actually, I'd paid $180,000 for it, but they didn't need to know that. They also didn't need to know that I'd had it authenticated by 3 separate experts, or that similar pieces from Monet's private garden series had sold at auction for between $2.80 and $4.2 million. "It's fine," I said, watching Dad bundle up what was essentially a small fortune in 19th-century French Impressionism. "Take it. See." Dad beamed, clearly pleased with what he interpreted as my cooperation. "This is exactly what I've been trying to tell you, Madison. You need to stop getting attached to things that don't matter and start focusing on what does." Kevin looked up from his phone. "Plus, Dad's office gets way more foot traffic than your apartment. More people will actually see it there." "That's true," I agreed. What I didn't mention was that Dad's office, Richardson Construction's headquarters downtown, also had significantly more security cameras, better insurance coverage, and a much higher likelihood of attracting attention from people who might actually recognize what they were looking at. "I still don't understand why you quit a perfectly good marketing job to play around with art," Mom said, settling back into her familiar role as the family's voice of practical concern. "The gallery business is so unstable. How are you even paying rent?" This was a question they'd been asking in various forms for 2 years, and I'd learned that any answer I gave would either be dismissed as unrealistic or criticized as insufficient. So I'd stopped giving detailed answers. "I'm managing fine." "Managing fine isn't thriving," Dad said, tucking the wrapped painting under his arm like a rolled-up poster. "When I was your age, I was already expanding the construction business. I had employees, overhead, real responsibility." "Richardson Construction is very impressive," I said, which was true. Dad had built his company from a 2-man operation to one of the most successful commercial contractors in the state. He employed 47 people and had an excellent reputation for quality work and fair dealing. He also had absolutely no appreciation for any form of success that didn't look exactly like his own. "The point is," Dad continued, heading toward the door, "you need to think bigger, Madison. This art dealer fantasy is just postponing real adulthood." "Art dealer fantasy," I repeated. "You know what I mean. running a proper business, having employees, contributing to the economy in a meaningful way. I walked them to the elevator, listening to Dad explain how the painting would add some class to his office conference room, where it would be seen by people who actually understand quality. Just promise me you'll think about what we discussed, Mom said as the elevator doors opened. That marketing position at Kevin's company is still available. I'll think about it, I lied. After they left, I stood in my living room looking at the pale rectangle on the wall where the Monet had hung. The morning light would look different tomorrow without those soft blues and greens to catch it. I pulled out my phone and called Elena Vasquez, the director of authentication at Sotheby's New York, who had become both a professional contact and a friend over the past 3 years. Elena, it's Madison. I need to report a location change for the Monet. The Garden Series piece. Don't tell me you're finally consigning it. Not exactly. My father just borrowed it for his office. He thinks it's worthless. Elena's laugh was sharp and delighted. Your father took a $3 million Monet because he thinks it's worthless? He called it a college dorm room decoration. Madison, you have to be kidding me. I wish I were. He wrapped it in a blanket and carried it out like a rolled-up movie poster. Where did he take it? His construction company offices downtown. Richardson Construction on 5th Street. The same father who keeps telling you to get a real job. The very same. Elena was quiet for a moment and I could practically hear her calculating possibilities. Madison, this could be educational for him. I was thinking the same thing. How attached are you to maintaining family peace? I looked at the empty wall again, thinking about 2 years of interventions and lectures about my unsustainable lifestyle. Not as attached as I used to be. Good. Because I have an idea. Elena's plan was elegant in its simplicity. As the authentication director, she maintained relationships with insurance companies, galleries, and private collectors around the world. Part of her job involved tracking the location and status of significant pieces, particularly those that might be at risk of theft or damage. I'll call his office tomorrow morning, she explained. I'll say we've been tracking the location of a missing Monet, and our records show it may have been moved to their building. Will that work? Madison, when Sotheby's calls about a missing $3 million painting, people take it very seriously. Especially when we mention potential legal liability. The next morning I was at my own gallery, a small but well-appointed space in the arts district that specialized in 19th and early 20th century European works, when my phone rang. It was Dad and he sounded confused. Madison, honey, something very strange happened this morning. What kind of strange? Someone from Sotheby's auction house called the office asking about a painting. They seem to think we had some valuable piece that belongs to them. I tried to keep my voice neutral. That does sound strange. The woman was very insistent. She said they were tracking a Monet, like the famous painter, and that it might be in our building. A Monet? That is weird. I told her we didn't have anything like that. I mean, the only painting in my office is that little landscape I got from you yesterday, and that's obviously not worth anything. Obviously. But Madison, here's the really strange part. She described the painting perfectly. The garden path, the water lilies, even the size of the frame. I felt my pulse quicken. Really? She's insisting on sending someone over to look at it. Some kind of authentication expert. I tried to explain that it was just a cheap decoration, but she got very serious about potential legal liability and stolen property recovery. That sounds concerning. It is concerning. Madison, where exactly did you get that painting? This was the moment I'd been anticipating. I bought it at an estate sale in Connecticut. An estate sale? Madison, what if it was stolen? What if the people running the sale didn't have the right to sell it? Dad, I'm sure it's fine. How can you be sure? Do you have paperwork? Proof of ownership. Actually, I had extensive paperwork. Authentication certificates, provenance documentation, insurance appraisals, and a clear chain of title going back to Monet's original sale to a private collector in 1891. But Dad didn't need to know that yet. I have some receipts. Receipts? Madison, if this is really a stolen Monet, I could be charged with possession of stolen property. My business, my reputation, everything could be ruined. The panic in his voice was genuine and I felt a small stab of guilt. But then I remembered his lecture about worthless art and meaningful contributions to the economy. Dad, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Madison, Sotheby's doesn't make mistakes about $3 million paintings. $3 million? That's what the woman said it was worth. $3 million, Madison. And I've got it hanging in my conference room like it's a calendar picture. I could hear voices in the background. His office staff, probably wondering why their normally composed boss was having a meltdown about wall art. Dad, maybe you should call me back after you talk to the authentication expert. Authentication expert? Madison, they're not just sending an expert, they're sending security. She said that when valuable artwork is potentially at risk, they take appropriate precautions to protect the asset. That makes sense. Makes sense. Madison, I've got security guards coming to my office because of a painting you bought at a yard sale. Estate sale. Whatever. The point is, I could be in serious trouble here. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time Dad's voice was completely different. Quiet, almost strangled. Madison, we need to talk. What happened? The people from Sotheby's just left. And you need to come to my office. Right now. Dad, I'm at the gallery. Madison. His voice had a quality I'd never heard before. Come to my office. Now. 20 minutes later, I walked into Richardson Construction to find Dad sitting in his conference room, staring at the small landscape painting that now sat on the table like evidence in a criminal trial. Elena Vasquez was sitting across from him, along with a man in a dark suit who I assumed was the security specialist she'd mentioned. Madison, Elena stood up with a professional smile. Thank you for coming. I'm Elena Vasquez from Sotheby's. We spoke on the phone yesterday. Of course. Has there been some kind of mix-up? Actually, no mix-up at all. We've confirmed that this is indeed Garden Path at Giverny, a 1890 Claude Monet from his private garden series. Quite a remarkable piece. Dad was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Madison, sit down. I sat. Ms. Vasquez has been explaining some things to me, Dad continued. About this painting, about its value, about how someone would go about acquiring such a piece. It's quite fascinating actually, Elena said, settling back into her chair. This particular work was sold at a private estate auction 18 months ago. The consignor was very selective about potential buyers. They wanted to ensure the piece went to someone who would truly appreciate its significance. 18 months ago, Dad repeated slowly. Yes. To a private collector who specializes in late 19th century French Impressionism. Someone with extensive knowledge of Monet's work and access to the kind of capital required for such acquisitions. The man in the suit, who Elena introduced as James Morrison from their security division, opened a tablet and showed us an image of the painting alongside several documents. The sale price was $180,000, he said, significantly below market value due to the estate's desire for a quick, private transaction. Current auction estimate would be between $2.80 and $4.2 million. Dad looked at me. Madison, did you pay $180,000 for this painting? The question hung in the air like smoke. I could lie, continue the charade that had somehow spiraled into this elaborate production. Or I could tell the truth and deal with the consequences. Yes. You paid $180,000. Yes. Madison, where did you get $180,000? I looked at Elena, who gave me an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. From my business, Dad. From the gallery. The gallery that's supposedly just scraping by? The gallery that's actually doing quite well. Dad was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he looked at Elena. Miss Vasquez, I'm confused about something. If Madison owns this painting legitimately, why did you call about it being stolen? Elena's expression didn't change. Mr. Richardson, we never said the painting was stolen. We said we were tracking the location of a significant piece, which is standard practice for works of this value. When high-value art changes location, especially without notice, it raises flags in our security protocols. But you mentioned legal liability, which exists whenever someone handles artwork of this value without proper insurance and security measures. Your daughter, as the owner, has the legal right to place the piece wherever she chooses. But as a business owner, you'd want to be aware of the liability implications of housing a $3 million asset. Dad turned to me slowly. So you let me take a $3 million painting to hang in my conference room. I tried to tell you it was valuable, but you said it was worthless. Madison, there's a difference between valuable and worth $3 million. Is there? Because yesterday you told me I needed to stop getting attached to things that don't matter and focus on what does. The silence in the room was profound. Elena and James were trying to look professional while clearly enjoying the family drama unfolding in front of them. Madison, Dad said finally, why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? That you could afford to buy paintings worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. That your gallery was successful. That you're apparently wealthy. I looked around the conference room, at the awards on the walls celebrating Richardson Construction's achievements, at the photos of Dad with mayor and city council members, at the evidence of everything he'd built and was proud of. Because you never asked, Dad. You assumed. I assumed what? That I was failing. That my business was a fantasy. That I needed your advice and intervention to become a functioning adult. Dad's face flushed. I was trying to help. You were trying to manage me. There's a difference. Elena cleared her throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should discuss the practical matters. Mr. Richardson, the painting is currently uninsured and unprotected in your office. If something were to happen to it, how much insurance would I need? Dad asked weakly. For a piece of this value? Probably $150,000 annually in premiums, plus enhanced security systems, climate control and restricted access protocols. Dad looked at the small landscape as if it had personally betrayed him. For something that looks like a college dorm room decoration? I supplied. He had the grace to wince. Madison, I owe you an apology. For which part? All of it. For dismissing your work, for taking your painting, for assuming you didn't know what you were doing. James Morrison spoke up. If I may, we do need to resolve the location issue today. The piece should either be returned to its properly insured location, or we need to arrange temporary coverage for its current placement. Take it back, Dad said immediately. Madison, please take it back to your apartment. I can't handle having something that valuable just sitting in my conference room. I looked at the painting, then at Dad's stricken expression. Actually, I have a better idea. Everyone looked at me expectantly. Elena, what would it cost to properly display this piece at my gallery for, say, 6 months? For a piece of this significance? With proper security, insurance and climate control? Probably around $25,000. And what kind of attention would a newly authenticated Monet generate? Elena's smile was sharp and professional. Considerable attention. Press coverage, collector interest, tourism. A piece like this could put a small gallery on the map. I turned to Dad. So here's what I'm thinking. Instead of hiding the painting in my apartment or risking it in your office, why don't I display it properly at the gallery? As the centerpiece of a show featuring recently authenticated impressionist works. That sounds expensive, Dad said cautiously. It's an investment. The kind of publicity this would generate could establish my gallery as a serious player in the regional art market. And you can afford the insurance and security? I pulled out my phone and showed him my business banking app. Not the full details, but enough to make the point clear. Dad stared at the screen for a long moment. Madison, how much is your business worth? The gallery itself or my total art assets? Both. I looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. The gallery as a business entity is worth about $800,000. My total art holdings are valued at approximately $3.2 million. The number hit the room like a physical force. Dad actually pushed back in his chair. 3.2 million? Give or take, depending on market conditions. James Morrison looked impressed despite his professional demeanor. Ms. Richardson, that's quite an achievement for someone so young in the industry. Thank you. Dad was still processing. Madison, you're a millionaire. On paper, yes. And yesterday I was lecturing you about getting a real job. Yesterday you were trying to help me based on what you thought you knew about my situation. Elena stood up, clearly sensing that the family discussion needed privacy. Why don't James and I give you some time to talk? We can handle the paperwork for the authentication and discuss display options later. After they left, Dad and I sat in his conference room looking at the small painting that had somehow blown up both our assumptions about each other. Madison, I feel like an idiot. You're not an idiot. You just didn't have all the information. I should have asked more questions instead of making assumptions. Probably. And I definitely shouldn't have taken your painting without asking what it was really worth. Definitely not. Dad managed a weak smile. So what happens now? Now we figure out how to have a relationship based on who we actually are instead of who we think we should be. Can you forgive me for underestimating you so badly? I looked at him, at the successful business owner who'd been so worried about his struggling daughter that he'd convinced himself she needed constant guidance and intervention. The irony wasn't lost on me that his concern had been motivated by love, even if it had been expressed as criticism. Dad, there's nothing to forgive. But going forward, maybe we can start with the assumption that we're both competent adults who've figured out how to be successful in our own ways. Deal. He paused. And Madison? Yeah. I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago. Thank you. That means a lot. Can I ask you something? Sure. When you display this painting at your gallery, can I bring some clients by to see it? I'd like to brag about my daughter, the successful art dealer. I laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd had during a family conversation in years. I'd like that. 2 weeks later, the Monet was the centerpiece of Hidden Treasures, recently authenticated works, at Madison Richardson Gallery. The opening reception drew over 200 people, including collectors from 3 states, 2 museum curators, and a journalist from Art News magazine. Dad brought 12 of his biggest clients and spent the entire evening telling anyone who would listen about his daughter's expertise in 19th-century French Impressionism. The painting sold 3 days later to a private collector for $3.4 million. But the best part wasn't the sale. It was watching Dad finally understand that sometimes the things that look worthless to one person are priceless to someone who knows how to see their real value.